I now welcome everybody to this half-quarter final of McGoun 2013. I welcome the Prime Minister, Joey, to defend the case that stands in his name. Will you be doing 6 minutes or 7 minutes?
7 minutes.
And Op, will you be splitting?
We will be splitting.
All right, let's get started.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So the case we're running today is that we would allow people who donate blood and donate organs to put restrictions on who can receive those blood and those organs. So we're going to set this in the United States, where we think there's a lot of ideological charge that makes this very relevant. And we're going to set two types of restrictions you can put. First off, we think you can put restrictions on the actions by the means in which somebody injured themselves, particularly illegal actions, and in fact only illegal actions. So we think if you don't want your blood going to someone who got in a drunk driving accident, you can set that restriction. Secondly, we think you can put restrictions on people who have public associations with ideological organizations. So things like the NRA or the Republican Party or a gay rights activist group. We think that people who are publicly known to be parts of these organizations, you can stipulate that they can't receive your blood or organs. We think that these two are particularly relevant because they can be easily determined within the time frame of an organ donation. We also are making it very clear that we are only stipulating negative stipulations. So you can't say, my organs have to go to a person with X. You can only say they may not go to a person with condition Y. So we've got three main contentions for this. First off, the idea of an extension of body rights. Second, the idea of fulfilling wishes after somebody's death. And third, the idea of Good Samaritan laws and why we don't have them. So first, let's talk about body rights. Under the status quo, we have two scenarios where someone either does give their organs, but with no restrictions on who can receive them, or somebody chooses not to give their organs. We think implicit in this is what our society values in terms of body rights, that even after death, somebody's wishes over their organs are continued. We think that people over their organs and over their blood, body rights is an extension over that, which is why we allow somebody to choose not to donate their blood or organs. However, we think that the problem with this is that right now we have a binary option. It's all or nothing. You can either give your organs to anybody or give to nobody. We think, first off, that we're not actually extending body rights, but increasing the granularity of body rights. That the option to give organs but with restriction is a right between two other rights which we already grant. The right to give nothing and the right to give to anybody. Yes.
But is it you giving your blood to yourself without any sort of other process, or is it you going to the medical system and then giving the blood to somebody else?
Okay, we think that yes, it's mediated through the medical system, but we think that the decision to give or not to give is still left wholly up to the individual, and the medical system is there to administer and to actually make sure that somebody gets it. But we don't, however, think that that person is going to. That the medical system is responsible for these decisions. We think these decisions still fall down to the individual. The second thing we think is that even that in addition to this being something which is between these rights, we think that even if it were outside of these rights, that because it is somebody's own organ, their body rights extend completely over that, and they have the right to decide what happens with their organs after death, including restrictions. The second argument is about fulfilling wishes. Now we think that we already allow people to specify what they want for things to happen after their death. That's why we have wills, and in particular we have some really crazy wills, like people willing their entire estates to their dogs, where an executor has to buy stuff for that person's dog. We think that while this is really insane, we acknowledge people's wishes after their death. And we think this is something which is very important to our society. We think acknowledging these wishes after death is important for allowing people to cope with their own mortality, important for allowing these people's families to come to terms with this. We think it's also very important in the case of blood donation, where these people are actually still alive after their donations. We think that the reason why people do this sort of thing after their death is usually because they want to make the world a better place. It's a sense of altruism that they want to leave some sort of legacy. The problem is that they want to leave that legacy based on their perception of what makes the world good. Under the status quo, we don't allow them to make that legacy based on their own perception. So the example we're going to give is that a gay person probably does not want their organs to go to somebody who is an anti-gay rights activist. We think that that, in their view and their family's view, would in fact be making the world a worse place and is not fulfilling the motivation for their wish to give away their organs. We think, therefore, we are in fact violating this person's right to have their wishes fulfilled after death, and we think this is very harmful. We acknowledge that there are going to be cases, for example, the converse, where someone who hates gay people doesn't want a member of a gay rights group to give their organs, but we think that this is still valid under individual rights. That somebody who does this, we still acknowledge the right to make the world a better place according to your own view of that world. We think this individual right is paramount, yes.
Okay, why, when society has decided that every individual worth saving and these people are interacting with the social system, why is it alright for that individual's belief to override society?
Okay, we think this leads perfectly into my third point. We think every individual is worth saving, but we see that people have no obligations to take proactive actions to save those individuals, which is my third point, Samaritan laws. Good Samaritan laws. So, most notably, we don't have them. Under the status quo, people do not have a positive obligation to go out and save other people's lives, to give of themselves to protect other people. We think this is important because we acknowledge people's rights to protect themselves, we acknowledge people's rights to make decisions for themselves and to not interfere in other people's lives. We think this is very important. We think that while the medical system feels that that every individual should be saved, we think that that doesn't come at the expense at forcing other people to take actions or give of themselves to save these individuals. And so we think that while we wouldn't restrict what doctors can do, we think it's perfectly reasonable to restrict what donors can do because there's that separation before the medical system. So there's a few things I want to mention. First off, we think that this is probably going to encourage some people with strong ideological charges to donate organs when they might not otherwise donate organs. The other thing we want to say is that this is in many times not going to actually restrict somebody from getting an organ, it's going to restrict who gets which organ. We think that in many cases what's going to happen is the gay rights activist organ isn't going to go to the crazy Republican, but the crazy Republican is going to get somebody else's organ. We think this best fulfills the wishes of this person because they know that they didn't directly contribute to that person's life, but then in many cases this person hasn't actually been denied an organ. However, under our Good Samaritan point, if they are denied an organ, we still think that's justified. We still think these people have no obligation. They've told you this is an extension of body rights, an extension of the right to have a will after you die, and an extension of our lack of Samaritan laws. We beg to propose.
Hear, hear. I thank the member for his speech and welcome the Leader of the Opposition to oppose the bill that stands before the House today and open up his constructive speech for 7 minutes.
Should I look into the camera?
Breaking the fourth wall.
Okay, so we have three big themes of this debate, or arguments of this debate, that on-side opposition, which kind of also deal with the three big arguments that are brought up by Joey. Now, the first of which, on our side, is also, incidentally, the extension of a body right. So right now, what Joey told us today is that, body rights are intrinsic to all the people in society. We agree, that's a very fundamental aspect to having any sort of society. But we think the problem with modern society is that we are now in a state of mind where we think we can entitle privileges to rights and rights to privileges. And what do we mean by that? We mean that body rights naturally extend to everything you own as part of your body. But what you do, for example, if you cut your hair off, right, and your hair is donated to somebody with breast cancer, that's not considered part of your body anymore by legal standards because you willingly chose to cut your hair off and donate it to a cancer patient. It's not like you can say, hey, you know what, I don't like you with, I don't like your face, and just because you have chemo, you shouldn't get the hair that I cut. No. We think society has misconstrued what is a right and what is a privilege in this case. Secondly, we would like to argue that the nature of this is that as an individual, you're not just giving your blood by yourself. It's not like you're taking a syringe, popping it out, and injecting it to somebody. You're going through the state. So therefore, by extension, the state automatically has a part of this system. So you can't just assume that even though the state is helping you give your blood to somebody, that the state has no right, right? Like when we're looking at actors in any sort of equation, because the state plays an equally important part in facilitating the blood, the state also deserves a say in this, because they're the ones who facilitate this. So based on those premises, we think that the body right does not extend to the same extent that Joy wants to. Yes.
Okay, first off, we're okay with putting these same restrictions on hair donations. Second off, the goal of the state is to protect the rights of the individual.
We would also, that is true, but when the individual perceives privileges as rights, we argue that that's not the case. And secondly, the state has the right to restrict rights when it is in a case of harm. So like when we look at like what is the actual social contract when when a person puts himself in the system, right? Like when you as a person put yourself in the system, you adhere to certain standards and certain actions that allow for the survival or to allow for the betterment of collective society. And, if you don't do something and then the society gets a lot of detrimental harm, society says no to that, right? Obviously, the thing with blood transfusion is that society needs that because it's a very necessary part of our health system. And society has already given individuals a lot of choice in that by giving individuals the ability to say no in terms of blood transfusions. Right? That's already a precedent. Society has already given that right to individuals. But the problem is that when individuals choose where the blood goes, that can provide an extremely drastic harm to society, or choose, who not to give. And that's enough of a harm for society to say that, we don't want that. Because there's certain objective standards that society believes in. These objective standards being that, everybody deserves a blood transfusion regardless of who you are, and you should never have a shortage of blood, and no individual should affect that process. So in terms of this, we agree that, body rights are important, but it's not like society is giving a black and white image, right? Society is still giving individuals a choice to where they can give their blood or not. But due to the important and significant nature of having a blood in a medical treatment, they don't think that individuals can choose where to give blood, therefore, kind of imbalancing the very delicate medical procedure that's already in place. Now onto the second argument of, this, because it's kind of an extension of our will, an extension of the people's desire for altruism. We have many things to say to that. First of all, we would like to comment on the aspect of what altruism actually is, right? Individual altruism is a lot based on their individual morality. Like, what you think is altruistic is based on your set of beliefs, ideals, etc., etc. Like, for you, altruistic might be helping a lady off the road. It might not be. But the problem is that those ideas of morality and altruism should not apply to that of the state or that of society. Because society needs to work on a state of altruism that is very objective. Like, if you think altruism is, for example, stealing candy from a store, and like Robin Hood and giving it to the poor, that's nice. But a society can't live by those exact same standards. You can't have Robin Hoods, you can't have vigilantes. You have to have a very controlled sense of altruism, because without that, then you have a lot of subjective interpretation of what is right, what is wrong, what is a good deed, what is a not good deed. Furthermore, we look at this concept of externalities, right? Like, yes, we agree individuals should be able to be altruistic, but they should not be able to do it when they don't really know the externalities of their actions. Like, when an individual chooses not to give, to, for example, Senator John McCain because he doesn't like her, does an individual know how much other people not want to give to John McCain? No. An individual does not know every equation in this web of, blood donors. They can't assume how many people are going to give to each facet. So when an individual doesn't know that, yet makes an assumption about that, and furthermore, this assumption might actually cause harm to somebody else, we say the externality in this case is very gray. The same thing we would go for externalities is,
and an individual is allowed to do that. If they see a child being, if they see a car barreling down on the child, they have no obligation to save that child if it would cost them their own life. We don't enforce Good Samaritan laws. We don't force people to save somebody else's life.
But at the same time, it's like when you physically say you don't give it to somebody, you're actually participating in the action of harming them. It's like, here, your goal is to give blood, and yet, when you say no to that, you consent to the fact that they don't get it. You make that consensual act. Like, we see a lot of this happening, for example, in the financial sector. Yeah, you can give money to charities, right? But those charities don't let you decide, hey, you know what, you can just throw this money into every African village or every South American village you want. No. They have a process to which your altruism can be directed under objectified goals because they understand the actions, the processes, and the consequences of those actions. Lastly, we want to target this concept of, the individual always knowing what's right in this case. We think that individuals, even though they're rational, not individuals are able to think critically, going back to that idea of the externalities. And because not every individual can think critically about the cause and effect of their action, namely, when they give blood, therefore somebody else not giving blood, we think that individuals ultimately aren't right for this situation. Now, let's look at this third big point, which kind of also clashes with Joey's point of proactive individuals. We say that, yes, we do believe in proactive measures by individuals. The problem is, proactive measures isn't a black and white thing. Right now, we're providing a restriction on how they can be proactive. But we're not providing the agency to be proactive. They can still be proactive as they want. But the thing is, because they live in society, they can only be proactive in terms of goals and guidelines set out by society. You can't be proactive and be like, I want to save people, then come be Batman and beat other people up just because that's your vigilante justice. Society already has a precedence to which you can't be altruistic and you can help. But those standards and limits are set so that you don't harm other people which society tries to protect and tries to save. So it is based on this concept that we have objectified laws regarding what is good, what is bad, and what is better for people. And we believe that blood is too important to be passing around like liquid candy. We think this resolution must fall.
Hear, hear. I thank the member for his speech and welcome the MC to continue their team's constructive case in a speech not to exceed 7 minutes. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So, in my speech today, I'm going to go through and I'm going to reconstruct Joey's 3 arguments. I'm going to deconstruct the deconstruction that we saw coming outside first. So let's get right into it and let's start talking about body rights. Basically, what did we hear from side opposition? We heard a few things. We heard, first of all, that basically we should just, give blood to those who need it. Like, if people need blood, then they should get blood. And we think that, like, in some degree, sure, yes, people who need blood should have blood. But if we think that that was, like, a fundamental principle, and, like, if government was saying, like, that is the modus operandi of, like, the healthcare system, then we think that blood donations would be mandatory. We don't see that blood donations are mandatory. We don't see that organ donations are mandatory. And we think that what that demonstrates is that we think that, like, while yes, we want to have organs and blood available to those who need it, we don't demand that people give of themselves to save individuals when they need those organs. And that what we think that demonstrates is that we are relying on people to make the choice. We are not violating people's body rights. This isn't an issue of body rights. We are not willing to violate the rights of the individual and violate the choice of the individual to make sure that everybody who needs blood gets it. And so we don't think that this is really any different. We think that this demonstrates that the government does respect the rights of the individuals in making the choice whether or not to donate. We think that all we're doing is we're improving the status quo and extending the status quo and the rights that are recognized in the status quo by allowing the person to choose when they do, or like who they donate to. We also heard that like organ donations are a privilege. You can only do them by going through the state. Therefore, the state deserves a say. And we don't think that this is legitimate. We don't think that this is fair because we think that there are lots of, first of all, there's 2 reasons for this. We think that there are lots of systems that the state provides, that the person relies on the state executing them properly, and we also think that there are lots of situations where the state can't act because we recognize the rights of the individual. So let's go through that first section. Basically, we think that there are a lot of, if you will, state-implemented systems. Like, for instance, the mail system. I can write a letter, I can, address it, I can send it to somebody, and I expect that my letter is going to get to the person I addressed it to, and is going to be opened by that individual, not the mailman, not the guy who works in, like, I expect that my mail reaches the person I send it to. And if it doesn't, if there's a breakdown in that system, I get to say, hey, government and mail system, what the heck, what are you doing to my mail? And there's a problem when the government hasn't facilitated the mail system to better serve me. We think that the organ donations are similar. If the organ donations were, or its organ donation system and the blood donation system existed purely to make sure that the maximum number of organs and blood were available, then it would be a mandatory choice and people would not be able to opt out of it. But it's not. What that means is that it is a system designed to facilitate people to make certain choices because we think that some people are willing to give up their organs. It's something that is technically and medically available. We want to facilitate people to make that choice. Yes?
But we already have an incentive for donors. Like, we recognize them as, like, awesome people, and we have, like, donor
That's
cards.
great. We have an incentive for donors. Awesome. That's because we want blood and organs. But we don't force people into it. So the second reason for why this is, the state doesn't deserve a say. So first of all, it's a system that the state should be implementing. But secondly, like, it is an issue of individual rights, and it is body right, because for instance, like, Ken said, like, oh, well, like, it's just right to your body, but once you give your organ and you put that organ into the system, you don't no longer have a right to that organ. It's the state, it's the medical systems. But here's the thing, like, especially with organ donations, well, first of all, the blood donations, you don't get my blood until I go in to donate it. So unless I decide to be a donor, you're not getting that blood, you're not getting that organ. So it's only once I've made the decision. And if I don't make that decision because I don't have the chance to make the state stipulation, then we think that you don't get, like, the state never actually gets access to that blood and organs. But secondly, especially with organ donations, most organ donations are harvested posthumously, which means that you have to go into the body to get the organ. Like, you have to say, we're going to follow this person's wishes and enter into their body and remove the organ that they had given into the state. We think that, again, you only get the organs, you only get access to the blood when the person has made the choice to give it to the state. So we don't think that the state just gets to then force their own decisions onto it. We think that you have to be respecting the body rights. And we think that sometimes even if we don't agree with the choices that the individual makes, like for instance, when somebody leaves their estate to their dog, We still do this because we recognize the rights and the choices of the individual and respect the wants of the dead. We think that this is something that is important in our society. No. So, the second discussion that we heard from Kehan was about altruism and how we don't allow vigilantes, we don't allow people to decide their own altruism. And we think the reason we don't do that is we don't allow people to decide who to kill because we think that an individual doesn't get to make the choice of who to kill. Basically what we're really seeing from this argument on side opposition is that the idea of not giving your organ to an individual group is the same as denying that group the right to life, and choosing that group to die. And we think this is completely an unfair correlation, because that's like saying that, oh, if I don't donate my organs at all, I'm a bad person because I hate everybody, I hate all people, and I want everybody to die because they don't get my organs. We don't think that's what's happening. It is the choice to deny access to your body to a certain group of people because you think that they are actively detrimental to the world as you want the world to be, is not saying condemning them to death. It's saying if they want an organ, they can get it from somebody else. My organs are going to the people that I want my organs, or the people that I think my organs should go to. Yes.
Matt, when I pay taxes, do I choose where that money is redistributed within society?
Yes, if you live in Saskatchewan, you can choose whether your school, whether your taxes go to the Catholic education system or the public education system. You do get to make these choices in society. So we don't think opposition has a leg to stand on here. We think that you are not actively choosing to kill a person when you deny them your organ. We think that if this were the case, you would have mandatory blood donations, you would have mandatory organ donations. What we have not seen from side opposition, what we need to see from side opposition in this debate today, is we need to see them why the choice to donate an organ must be absolute. Why you will either choose to donate or not donate, and not whether or not you choose to donate but only to certain people. They need to demonstrate to us why it must be, if I'm willing to donate my organ, it must be available to everybody. And we don't think that we've seen anything of that coming out of side opposition. We think that we've done a lot to demonstrate to you on side proposition why this disrespects body rights of the individual, why this disrespects the wishes of the dead, and why this frankly is inconsistent with our stance on Good Samaritan laws and the fact that we don't have them. We think that we need to see opposition telling us why it's important for people to make the absolute choice of donating organs and not care and not have any right to choose where that organ goes to. And finally, we do think that, one last thing, we do think that if you have these negative stipulations, all it does is, nothing else, is it causes people to think about who and where their organs are donating, and we do think there's still going to be a lot of people who say, you know what, I don't care if it goes to a drunk driver, I want to donate my blood anyways. And so we think that you actually see another opportunity for altruism because you get to see people saying that I want my organs going to people who I may not necessarily agree with. So we think that there's actually an added benefit to the blood donation, or to the organ donation under this, because you see people donating their organs.
Here, I thank the member for his speech and welcome the MO to close up opposition's constructive case in a speech not to exceed 7 minutes. Here.
Okay, Matt, let's answer some of those push burdens. Okay, first things first, I want to look at the status quo in the US as set by the prop side. Okay, so there are two types of interactions you have when you're donating organs. You can choose to donate organs on an individual basis, i.e. if you're looking for a kidney, let's say Ian's looking for a kidney, and he comes to me and he asks me, hey, can I have your kidney? And I decide, hey, Ian's a cool person, I agree with his beliefs, I can give my kidney specifically to him. That is the first method of interaction. The second method of interaction, the one we're talking about, is me donating to the state. And that is inherently different because when I donate to the state, I recognize complete social values. It's not a personal interaction between me and the donor anymore, it's an interaction between me and the government. And at that point, the government, the representative of society and social values, decides who gets that organ. Because ultimately, it's not that individual interaction anymore. No one is forcing you to donate to the government, but when you do donate to the government, you submit yourself to those social values, you submit yourself to the idea that every individual is worth saving, and your organs can go to anyone. That is why we're very, very proud to oppose. So let's talk about body rights. I'm going to get into a lot of refutation before I do any constructions. So we heard two things under there are big, main argument of body rights. They told me, your organs, your choice, right? So this is my property, I get to do whatever I want with it. And secondly, they told me that body rights extend to what is taken from my body even after I'm dead. So here's what we talked to you about. One, I already got into this big idea that this is no longer an individual interaction, right? We think body rights govern individual interactions. body rights describe my ability to like have basically sovereignty over my own body in terms of me interacting with someone else, right? Which means that someone can't take like my organs by choice. The government can't force me to donate those organs, right? So when I'm still alive and I choose to make that individual donation, I'm perfectly within the bounds of body rights. But if I choose to interact with the government, then I am submitting myself to those standards, and body rights no longer apply, right? Like I have made the concession that I have given up like this property of my body. From there on, it's like social values that dictate further interactions. So we talked to you about the status quo. Okay, actually, yeah, I'll take it.
Okay, so all you're saying right now is the reason people have to donate their organs to everybody is because the state says so, and the state didn't set up the system. Why is the state making this arbitrary restriction on personal choice?
Okay, the state is making this arbitrary restriction on personal choice because your interaction with greater society isn't like based on your values, right? Like that's why we live in a democratic system which basically decides what society wants, not what you want. The problem with this resolution is if you give individuals this power, you give them power over a facet of society that is supposed to serve everybody, right? So if there's a shortage on organs for people that are like anti-homosexual because like people hate these people, then you're basically affected a facet of society that is supposed to serve everyone equally. You're never supposed to have that sort of power within the framework of society that we've set up. We don't think this is forcing altruism of people, right? Like, you still maintain that ultimate body right of whether or not you choose to donate. The only thing we're saying that when you donate to the state is you have to make a different sort of like evaluation on whether this is a net benefit for you or whether this is a net harm, right? The only difference that exists when you donate to greater society as opposed to a specific type of individual is you assessing, is me like donating to society worth the risk that like this could end up, like my kidney could end up in a gay person, and I particularly don't like gay people, right? Like if that risk, if that harm is so great to you that you don't think you should donate, then fine, you don't have to, right? Like, but the fact is like the nature of social altruism is not based on preference, right? It's based on whether you think you can do good by doing something small. It's not preferential. That's not altruism. That's just playing strategy within society. Okay, so yeah, we told you why altruism isn't about subjective precedence. They next told us that the role of the government is to protect the power of individual. Here's why they fail under their own model of the role of the government. First of all, we don't think you're protecting those individuals that are going to inherently be segregated by this model, right? Like, if I'm a person that people just don't like and therefore I don't have access to the models, you have failed to protect my individual rights because I'm supposed to be accessing a social facet of health, right? Like, society shouldn't have a bias against me. Individuals can have a bias against me, but that shouldn't be reflected in how I'm served by society, right? So even under their own model, they fail. Now they told us like in Saskatchewan, right? Like, or not in Saskatchewan, we're in the States, I can choose where my taxes go. In the States you can, but even if you can have like a limited power of where some of your taxes go, we already recognize in this form of altruism, if you want to call paying your taxes altruism, that we like value the government's assessment and redistributing wealth and resources in society, right? Which means we already submit ourselves to a standard, to a precedent in which we decide that all like members of society are valuable and that it's not you as a taxpayer who decides where exactly your money goes, right? You submit to this idea of the government as a representative of total social values. So here's our further constructive. So we want to talk about the nature of social reform, right? Like, we don't think as an individual, you're actually unbiased enough to accurately assess value to things, right? Like, Ken touched on this idea when he started talking to you about vigilantism, right? Like, every person has their own slightly different, slightly unique version of social justice, but the reason we don't let them apply that is because we recognize that individuals have biases which don't serve like greater society, right? We think the same sort of idea applies here, that if society really thinks that smokers shouldn't get organs, or that gay people shouldn't get organs, or that like another minority shouldn't get organs, then society will collectively make that decision, and that sort of reform will take place. That reform should not take place on the level of the individual. The role of government here is to protect the basic idea of a right, like in the sense that you either participate or you don't, right? We give you a choice, but that choice has to take place under like an acceptable harms benefits analysis as defined by society. So the reason we oppose this is because the individual really gains undemocratic power, right? Like, we talked to you about how they basically go against precedents and how they gain specific power over others when they should be, when it should be society serving those people. So yeah, for all these reasons that I've discussed, for the fact that their basic premise of body rights does not apply in the context of like an individual's interaction with general society, with the government. And for the reason that like the role of the government really does not exist as described by their model, we think we've conclusively shown that this resolution should fall.
Here, here. I thank the member for his speech and welcome back the LO to close up opposition's case in a speech not to exceed 3 minutes, all of which is protected. Here, here.
Okay, so there's three big themes today, and the first one is a really minor one. The first one is, like, what is the nature of the blood transfusion, right? Like, as Stefan talked about, we currently live in a society where you already have two methods of conduct, the private or the public. But more importantly, we realize that, like, blood transfusions are an integral part of society beyond just, the fact that they're part of your body. They're necessary for a lot of medical procedures, and without them, there's a huge chance of causing harm. And more importantly, without currently giving blood from public donors, there's no other way of achieving blood. So we realize blood transfusions are important. The second big question of today is, what are the boundaries of rights? So like, I made this quick diagram if you guys want to look at it, right? Like, there's a seesaw, right? They're in the middle of society, and the ball is a policy. One side you have rights, one side you have social action, right? Currently in our society, the ball is in the middle. But what happens when you push the ball to one side or the other is that you imbalance the equation. In our current society, right, we have a boundary to rights. We allow rights to exist so much that they don't imbalance the amount of social harm or social reform they can get, and vice versa. What is the nature of that with us today? Well, like, the problem with that is we have a very, like, when we're doing this, we're pushing the boundaries of what we believe are right on. Like, as Stefan talked about, right? Like, there is a current private means of going through blood. But when you're going through the state, first of all, the state is also responsible for administering the transmission of blood. And secondly, is that even though you have a sovereignty to your body, that sovereignty only extends to your ability to enact agency, right? In this case, you're physically conceding to give your blood to somebody else, and you're given your right, and you're acknowledging that. It's not like somebody's coming in and forcing you to take your body, like, we've already created the standard where the government doesn't have the right to do that. So therefore, you're not actually being inhibited of your agency, you're giving your agency away, and you're conceding to that. But in this case, when you're choosing who not to give blood, you're hurting the agency of other people because, hey, you don't know if those Republicans might not get blood, and if they don't get blood, then they can't actually have agency because they might be dead or harmed, or et cetera, et cetera. So in this instance, we see that not only does the government have a right to act because they're in the situation, but that your body rights already there. So the third theme today is social restriction, right? So when are there social restriction coming in? We say there's two instances. One is when there's externalities in the system, right? First of which is people don't have the necessary knowledge to make the right decision, right? The government are the one who knows how to redistribute and relocate this. And secondly, they don't know the full harms of the decision, right? Like, they don't know how many people they're going to harm by not giving Republicans blood. On the second side of this, we have social restrictions based on, the actual sense of altruism of a social aspect and individual aspect, right? Like, that's why we don't allow vigilante justices. That's why in charities, not all donors get to decide where all the money goes in every village they want in Africa. What we want to say by that is individuals can't be a part of a cycle, right, of other individuals and then choose which part of the cycle they give to. When you concede to the social contract, you concede to abiding by objective standards. And the government is the only one who can apply these objective standards of altruism in terms of blood, in terms of saving the individual lives of others. So when harm is being done to somebody else, but you're not being specifically harmed, yes, you may have a right to participate, but you can't physically participate on who you want. Because in that case, you're not just getting your right taken away, you're harming the rights of somebody else.
Here, here. I thank the member for his speech and welcome the Prime Minister to close up this debate.
You start taping and you draw pictures.
Order. Order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go through some of the things that Stefan said. He said a lot, and so it's a lot to deal with in a small amount of time. First off, he brought up this wonderful example of taxes. We think taxes are utterly ridiculous because taxes are something which are mandatory. You can't opt in and opt out of taxes. Also, taxes are not extracting things from your body. We think this is why, like organ taxes would be bad and money taxes are okay because money is inside your body, unless you ate it. So then we saw this idea of kind of like creating social benefit, that like this is going to marginalize groups. And we think that, again, this is a case where we totally let people marginalize groups with the way they take their individual choice. We think we think that we don't allow people to take action specifically harming, but acknowledge that there is no obligation that when you die you give all your money to charity. There's no obligation that when you die you do anything socially beneficial, or even that you don't do things that are socially harmful. We think we let people do things which are socially harmful when they die because individual choice is paramount there. So those are kind of the two main things I'm going to deal with from Stefan's speech. So let's look at the big themes of this debate. First off, we think the right to be wrong is a very big theme of this debate. We think that we've heard this idea that like individuals aren't always rational, that they can't always gauge the externalities, and to this we say yes, that's true. But we think that you can only restrict them from doing that at the cost of their individual rights. We think that individuals have the right to do things that they see as beneficial, that the government doesn't define a standard overbearing set of morality, that instead the government works to maintain individuals' rights. And we think that this is how right frameworks works. People have the rights to, that people's rights are maintained until they violate the right of somebody else. And we think that somebody who, when somebody has, like that, there's no inherent right to somebody else's organ. And so we think that given that, you have your right of freedom to do with your body whatever you choose, including donate it to a restricted group, because it's not violating somebody else's right. Because we think this right to somebody else's organs is not a positive right. The second, and then we've heard this term vigilante tossed around, and we think that everybody is a vigilante. Everybody tries to make the world better as they see it. We think this right must be maintained. The second big theme in this debate has been an individual versus state interaction. And this has basically come down to a lot of flawed metaphors from side opposition. This idea of taxes, this idea of government providing social programs. We think that this is different. We think that posthumous actions are based purely on individual means, and that the state is the actor who provides a legal framework for this to happen, but that the state isn't trying to achieve its own goals through these things. So what opposition had to tell you today was either that people don't have this right to control of their own body, or that this right is outweighed by social harms. We have seen neither of these things. We haven't seen this idea that people don't have the right to their own body, and we haven't seen how this actually detriments society, because people do and should make their own choices of how they want the world to be better.
I thank the member for his speech.